Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the week starting on Monday, June the 24th, 2024. So let me start off by going over the structure of this video. To begin with, I'm going to be looking at the main events astrologically this week, and I will be emphasizing the fact that Saturn is slowing down, and at the end of the week on Saturday it goes retrograde. Indeed, it will then be stationary retrograde in the jargon. So having looked at the main events this week, I'm going to consider a few people and a couple of countries that I think might be influenced by this Saturn going stationary retrograde. Joe Biden, for example, and Elon Musk, and Kim Kardashian. I don't know much about Kim Kardashian, but apparently she's important. People are interested in her. Some people are interested in her. And also Jordan Bardella, the young right-wing politician in France. Remember, we've got elections coming up in France, and he's a Virgo. And so Saturn is going to be opposition his Virgo sun, and that is something he might want to take into account in the light of this, this big challenge for him, the French elections. And having looked at some people who might be influenced by this Saturn retrograde, I'm going to be turning my attention to the I Ching, and I will be asking the I Ching what this week is going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video. And my I Ching reading will have 4 sections. It will have a general section, then money, then business and career, and finally relationships. So let's start off by looking at the start positions. The positions of the planets at the beginning of the week. So there we have Saturn, 19 degrees 24 Pisces, about to go retrograde. It's moving very, very slowly at the moment. And we also have 3 planets in Cancer. We've got Sun in Cancer, Venus in Cancer, and Mercury in Cancer, and we are going to have those 3 planets in Cancer throughout the week. So there's going to be a strong Cancerian emphasis this week. So it may be that some of us might be more sensitive than usual, perhaps even a bit more sentimental than usual. Venus in Cancer can be very sentimental. Can have a certain maudling sentimentality to it. Now, what you might notice about this chart is the beginning of a week is that there is very little in fire. Okay, we've got the North Node in Aries, we've got Chiron in Aries, but these are not personal planets. There are no inner planets, even social planets in fire signs. Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, they're not in fire signs. And so the week might feel that it kind of lacks a certain spark. We'd like the moon to be in Aries. The moon starts a week in Aquarius. Then it has to go through Aquarius, followed by Pisces, still nothing in fire signs. Finally, when does the moon go into Aries? The moon goes into Aries on Friday. So for most of the week, certainly up until Friday, it just may feel that there just isn't much of a spark. There isn't much going on. And so we're going to have to create the energy ourselves. Now, in terms of a blow-by-blow account, on Tuesday, Venus makes a semisquare to Uranus. As far as I'm concerned, semisquares are important aspects. See, there's Venus. So when Venus gets to 10 Cancer on Tuesday, it will be 45 degrees away from Uranus. And so on Tuesday, there may be certain strains in certain relationships. We can't expect relationships to be smooth flowing. Things might just happen. And at the same time, Venus is the ruler of money. So from a financial point of view, we need to be on our guard. There might be unexpected news of a financial nature, which causes us to have a little bit of concern. But it's just important not to panic. This is a fast-moving aspect. So if you see that something isn't as you expect financially, don't panic. There's probably a way around the situation. Of course, it may also be an opportunity. Then on Wednesday, there's Mercury, and it moves towards, and it moves onto a trine with Saturn. So midweek, there may be a certain amount of stability. We may be able to get our ideas together. Mercury in Cancer, trine, Saturn in Pisces. Not a very exciting trine, but I think quite useful. Perhaps if there's been recent concerns and something hasn't been properly organized, we can step in and create some order. Then on Friday, Mercury moves away from a trine to Saturn, and it makes a semi-square to Jupiter. The Mercury semi-square Jupiter may encourage us to talk too much, and we might have lots of ideas, but the question is, how can we get these ideas into the open? And we can see this semi-square here. So there's Jupiter, and Mercury will move on a bit. So Mercury will be 45 degrees from Jupiter. And so that semi-square, it may encourage us to think too much. It may encourage us to say things which are somewhat inappropriate. So I think many of us might have to be careful what we say. And Jupiter in Gemini may also represent a challenge. So there is Mercury in Cancer, minding its own business. Cancer is a mute sign. Crabs don't make a noise. The other water signs are also mute. That's how they were described traditionally, because Pisces, fish don't make a noise. Scorpions don't make a noise. And of course, crabs don't make a noise. At least that is the underlying principle of the mute signs. So, we're trying to mind our own business. We're not trying to say too much, but then we find we can't help ourselves. Perhaps Jupiter in Gemini represents an event or a realization or a challenge, and we just have to say what's on our mind. Then on Saturday, we get the real action. Mars is semi-square Neptune, so a lot of semi-squares this week. And so with Mars semi-square Neptune, there may be a tendency to put our energies into the wrong place. Neptune is the planet of confusion, and there's Mars, and Mars will be at 15 Taurus, and that could be of extra concern because Mars will be semi-square the Aries point. So Neptune will be on the Aries point, and Mars will be semi-square the Aries point. So with Mars square Neptune, it's a general atmosphere of chaos. People really do not know how to apply their energy. They're going to want to apply their energy. They're going to want to be assertive, but in ways which may be completely unhelpful. So on Saturday, be careful. Don't assert yourself unless you really know what you're doing. And, if you get angry about something, you feel you have to take action, think again. Try to exercise some restraint. because there is some danger that you make a mistake. And of course, with Mars semisquare Neptune, it's just very important to steer clear of alcohol, intoxicants, indeed anything that could stop us from thinking straight. That needn't be just drugs and alcohol. It can also be people. Certain people are just confusing. If someone has been confusing in the past, it's likely that they're going to be confusing again. So perhaps we should stick to people who are very grounded. But most importantly on Saturday, Saturn goes retrograde. It comes to an absolute halt, and then it starts its retrograde motion. And Saturn will keep going backwards. Remember, this is a geocentric view of Saturn. Heliocentrically, Saturn never goes retrograde, but geocentrically, it certainly does, because we're looking at things from the Earth's perspective. And from the Earth's perspective, Saturn will actually continue going retrograde until November the 15th. That is after the US presidential election. In fact, Saturn will go back as far as 12 degrees 42 Pisces. So when it gets to 1242 Pisces on November the 15th, it will start moving forward again. So right now, Saturn is coming to a standstill. So the influence of Saturn is really very, very focused. As I think it was Stephen Arroyo said, in one of the books I read his book. I read it in the 1980s. I think it was Stephen Arroyo. I may be wrong, but I think he described the retrograde planet as in terms of a finger moving through a candle flame. When you move a finger through a candle flame, it doesn't hurt because your finger is moving. It's the same with planets moving. They don't hang around. But when you've got a planet going stationary direct, it's like your finger stays still in the candle flame, and it hurts. It really hurts. You're going to burn yourself. In the end, you're going to get third-degree burns. So that can be the impact of Saturn going stationary retrograde. It's stuck on a position. So if Saturn is stationary retrograde on a particular position in your chart, then you may be impacted by it in quite a big way. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking at some charts where we do have this laser beam impact, where it is a real possibility. So let's start off with Kim Kardashian. Remember, I don't know anything about her, really. I mean, I know she's very famous. Maybe she's just famous for being famous. And she has actually quite a powerful chart in many respects. She really benefits, I think, from having that Saturn in Libra. She's one of that Saturn in Libra generation, people born in the 1980s. Meghan Markle has Saturn in Libra. Who else? I think Paris Hilton had it there. And also the president of El Salvador, what's his name? Nayib Bukele. He has Saturn in Libra. In fact, I think he has an exact Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Libra. But Saturn works very well in Libra. It's exalted in Libra. A lot of people who became famous through reality TV have Saturn in Libra. When they were sort of perhaps in their early 20s, the beginning of the century, around 2000, the Saturn in Libra generation started to really make their presence felt. And with Kim Kardashian, she has Venus in Virgo, square Neptune. Venus in Virgo can be a little bit materialistic, can be very much focused on how one looks and the material side of things, style perhaps over substance. Meghan, she has Venus in Virgo. So Venus in Virgo square Neptune, it's glamour, I suppose, but it's glamour with a purpose. It's glamour that may be somewhat contrived, but Venus for Kim Kardashian, does have a big impact on who she is. And anyway, Saturn goes stationary retrograde at 1926. 1926. What is it? Pisces. So Saturn is going to go stationary retrograde right opposition her Venus. Now, that's going to be difficult. I don't know. I have no idea what's happening in her life. In one sense, I don't really care. And we're probably never going to find out what's going on in her life. But I wouldn't have thought life at the moment for Kim Kardashian is a bundle of laughs. And with Venus square Neptune, that is her powerhouse. That is the fantasy that she is presenting. And so with Saturn opposition her Venus and going stationary opposition her Venus, I would think that late June, which we're in, late June, early July, could be a difficult time for her. Also notice that Kim Kardashian has her moon at 28 degrees 9 Pisces. So Neptune is about to go retrograde, and so Neptune is pretty close to her moon in Pisces. And so it's a confusing time for her. I mean, how is it going to be confusing? I don't know. It could be about relationships. If you've got Saturn opposition your Venus, it could be her own concerns about the way she looks. Maybe her self-esteem is not going to be great. Venus in Virgo very much focuses on detail. And so perhaps with Saturn opposition Venus, she's going to be very perhaps focused on the details of herself. Looks are important, and that might bother her. Of course, it shouldn't bother her, but it nonetheless might bother her. So that's Kim Kardashian. Now, before I look at other celebrities, I should probably look at the chart of Saturn going retrograde. So let me show you what I mean. So there is Saturn going, that's the moment that Saturn goes retrograde. It's Saturday the 29th, this is set for London, 8:08 p.m. So this is the absolute moment that Saturn goes retrograde. And this may tell us something about what this Saturn retrograde is actually all about. Now, Saturn goes retrograde square the Uranus-Hades midpoint. We can't really see that on this chart, but let me just show you the hypotheticals. Remember, Hades is a hypothetical planet. It's not necessarily real. So there's Uranus. Where's Uranus gone? There's Uranus, and there is Hades. You can see Hades. It's kind of like the cemetery. You can see a cross there, and so the Uranus-Hades midpoint is at around, I think it's actually in 1926 Gemini, and so Saturn is hitting the Uranus-Hades midpoint, and I think that is quite grim, particularly as it is completely exact. So with the Uranus-Hades midpoint, we might be thinking about limitation, perhaps death, perhaps destruction. I'll just read you what Alfred Witter says about Saturn on the Uranus-Neptune midpoint. So let's... sorry, Uranus Hades midpoint. So Saturn on Uranus Hades midpoint. Separation or losses through murder, ugly and mean cunning. Okay, I'm not saying it's really about murder, but people are up to no good here with Saturn on the Uranus Hades midpoint. So a lot of people are looking after themselves, not really thinking about anyone else. There's a certain criminality in the air, plus just generalized unpleasantness. So I don't think it's a bundle of laughs, this Saturn going stationary direct. Now, why should we consider something so abstract as the chart of Saturn going stationary direct? Well, let's just take an example. As you know, if you've been watching my videos, I do like to relate things back to the Second World War very often. Now, the reason I like to relate things back to the Second World War is because the Second World War is such an extreme time that if anything works, you'd expect it to work during the Second World War, wouldn't you? So let me just look at the chart of Saturn going retrograde on August the 14th, 1939. I've set this chart for Berlin. So this is the precise moment that Saturn went retrograde in 1939, August the 14th. Remember, Germany invaded Poland on September the 1st, and Britain and France declared war on Germany on September the 3rd. So this was just a couple of weeks before the World War broke out. And so that's the position of Saturn going retrograde. Notice Mars is in Capricorn, pretty close to the 7th house cusp. It's even closer to the 7th house cusp if you set that chart for Warsaw. Poland was, of course, a country that was invaded. So if you set the Saturn retrograde for Warsaw, Mars is exactly on the descendant. And we can use astrocartography to really illustrate this. Let's look at the chart for Europe. You can see here this line, all the places at the time of Saturn going retrograde that Mars was direct, but Mars was exactly on the descendant. You can see it, and it goes right through Warsaw, and this is, of course, in those days, the border between, this was all part of Germany, so it kind of links with the broad area in which Germany invaded. So that kind of fits. And there is another thing about this chart that's worth pointing out this time that Saturn went retrograde. Where did Saturn go retrograde on August the 14th, 1939? Saturn went retrograde at 1 degree 16 minutes Taurus. So what's the big deal about 1 degree 16 minutes Taurus? Well, the big deal about that is that Hitler's sun was at 0 degrees 48 Taurus. So it went stationary retrograde right on Hitler's sun 2 weeks before the invasion of Poland. So I think that is an indication that we should be looking at these Saturn retrograde charts. Now, turning back to the Saturn station chart that we have, we might then want to look at the astrocartography of this chart, and there we have it. Now, the Mars descendant line, the equivalent line here, is not going through Europe, it's not going through Ukraine, it's going through Peru, Colombia, Peru and Colombia. So those are, I don't know what's going on in Peru and Colombia. That's where Mars is on a descendant. There may be some aggravation in Latin America, in those two countries. That is possible. Another place to look at might be Iran. You see, there's Iran. Saturn is on the ascendant. I don't know whether you can see that here. No, I don't think you can see that. Sorry, your view is rather obscured, so you'll have to take my word for it. That Saturn is on the ascendant in Iran at this time. Or maybe I can hold on. Let me move this. I can maybe. Whoops! I didn't want that. There. I think I can move it forward for you. There you go. There are all the places where Saturn is on the ascendant. It sort of goes through. It looks like the Gulf, Tehran. Well, of course, that's an important waterway, isn't it? So with Saturn on the ascendant, say in Dubai, maybe we should reset this chart for Dubai, see what it looks like. So we're going to relocate for Dubai. Now you see Saturn is rising in a very critical part of the world. Now, that might tell us what is going on in the Middle East, but we need to be careful. Not so much in Israel. I mean, I'm sure stuff will be going on in Israel, but I just don't think that Saturn is necessarily focusing entirely on Israel, but it's more about that part of the world, around Dubai, Persian Gulf. There might be a flare-up there with this Saturn retrograde. So that's certainly a part of the world to watch. Okay, so let me just go back to famous people. So I looked at Kim Kardashian. Then there is Joe Biden. You're probably bored of Joe Biden at this stage of things, but I've talked about him rather too much. But Joe Biden's IC, the lowest point in his chart, is 1954 Pisces. So Saturn is going stationary retrograde on Biden's IC. I think that is a little bit disturbing for him. Something is undermining him. This might just be about his health, about how he's dealing with things, his own security. I don't mean security in terms of getting attacked or anything. More, the foundations of who he is. But I think in general, I think it's quite challenging. And maybe it has something to do with his family. We know that Hunter Biden his son has just been convicted of lying on a firearms form. So there may be more stuff going on relating to that. But whatever it is, I think it's somewhat undermining. And then another person I just talked about was Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom has his midheaven at 20 degrees 7 Gemini. And he's got his ascendant at 21 Virgos. And as you remember, he's got his Mars on the IC. And so Saturn is going stationary retrograde on his descendant. That might be about his enemies. Maybe there are forces in the Democratic Party that don't like him. Are just concerned about what his plans are. And with Saturn going stationary direct square his midheaven, it may actually be quite a frustrating time for him. I mean, if it's true that he's someone who's really ambitious, and I think there is some evidence from his chart that he is ambitious. He has got Mars square Pluto, Mars angular on the IC, Pluto angular on the ascendant. He really has the highest ambitions, I think, including perhaps to be president. But Saturn on the descendants, Saturn going stationary retrograde, may be a bit of a downer for him. And he may perhaps realize that he can't achieve everything that he wants to achieve. Turning to a couple of other people, Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson has his Mercury at 1919 Gemini. So that means that Saturn is going stationary direct, exactly square his Mercury. So, Saturn square the Mercury can be a little bit depressing. Something might make him a bit down. Maybe he'd got plans, he'd got ideas, and something's bothering him. I don't know. Maybe it's what's going on in Ukraine. I mean, he's someone. I know he's not prime minister anymore. He's not even even a member of parliament. But there just may be questions, perhaps, about that, and it may be quite irritating for him. But I think there may be some frustrations in his life. Now, by the way, I should say that I have my Mercury at 19 in, I think it's 1953 Gemini. So I'm actually beginning to feel Saturn going stationary retrograde on my Mercury. Yeah, my Mercury is pretty close to Boris's. I think Boris gets it harder than me because his Mercury is at 1919, really close to the Saturn going retrograde, really close to the square of Saturn going stationary retrograde. My Mercury is, half a degree out, so it's not exactly there. So it'd be interesting to know what Boris is experiencing at the moment. Someone else would be Elon Musk. Elon Musk has his Venus at 19 degrees 24 Gemini. Venus in the 12th, so Saturn stationary retrograde square his Venus, maybe something to do with Elon Musk's relationships, the people he hangs out with. I don't know what his marital situation is like, but there may be someone around him, perhaps a woman, who is causing him a bit of grief. And close relationships that Elon Musk is involved in may be put under a fair amount of pressure with with Saturn going stationary retrograde. And another person is George Soros, who, he's about to be 94. We don't have a time of birth for George Soros, but he does have his Mars at 1940 Gemini. So George Soros, Saturn, stationary retrograde, square his Mars. So Soros, at the age of 94, does need to be careful how he goes. You might say, he needs to perhaps be careful about accidents, falling over. I don't know. I'm sure he has a lot of help. I have no idea what his level of fitness is, but he does need to be extra careful. And, although I don't have his time of birth, if we take noon in Budapest, you've got moon square Mars. But also, Soros might be frustrated about something. He may be looking at his plans, what he's been involved with, in open society, looking at the way the world is going, and there may be things that just make him really angry. Perhaps things are happening which are suggesting to him that his vision of the world is just an impossibility. Maybe he's looking at Ukraine like Boris. I know that Soros has done quite a lot to impose his will on Eastern Europe, and maybe what's going on in Eastern Europe and Ukraine and Russia is just really not to his liking, and he's just annoyed about it. So that is one possibility. But I think he also has to be careful how he goes on a physical level, particularly as the fact that particularly given the fact that he is just about to turn 94. So at 94, he needs to be a bit careful. So that's Soros. Now, in terms of the French elections, there is Jordan Bardella. I talked about him recently. So he is Marine Le Pen's protege. He's very young. He's only 28. and he's certainly a rising star in French politics. We do have an election coming up. The first round is, at the end of the week. In fact, the day after Saturn goes retrograde. So Saturn goes retrograde on the 29th, and there are elections in France on the 30th. And there is his sun at 20 degrees 18 Virgo and in fact, he has got Saturn opposition Saturn in his chart anyway. And so it's a Saturn return event. Saturn is kind of returning to where it was when he was born. Now, it does go retrograde just before 19 degrees 26, but Saturn is really picking up on that. And, I know that his party, what are they called, the National Rally, are predicted to do well, and that Macron has taken this big risk, but I just have this feeling that it may all be a bit too much for Jourdain Bardella. I think he has to be very careful what he does. I think he could make mistakes. Look at his ascendant as well. His ascendant is at 21 Sagittarius. So I don't think he's in a great position. I mean, I suppose it could just be about hard work, but this is not Saturn on the midheaven. It's Saturn actually... Saturn is not. This is at the cusp of the third house. It's just Saturn, opposition his sun. So it may actually be a somewhat frustrating experience for him, these French elections. Perhaps not quite what we were expecting, but it is a sort of a Saturn return experience for him. Now let's consider some countries. Now, while we're on the subject of Jourdain Bardella, we might as well talk about France. So this is a chart of the storming of the Bastille, 1789. As far as I'm concerned, it is a symbolic beginning of France, in the same way that the Easter Rising in 1916 was the beginning of Ireland, even if the rebels didn't immediately take power. And at the time of the storming of the Bastille, Venus was at 432 Leo. And that means that Saturn goes stationary retrograde exactly sesquiquadrate France's Saturn. There's Saturn, the Bastille 23 Pisces. Sorry, what am I talking about? Saturn is at 1926 Pisces, fairly close to France's Saturn. So France, like Jourdain Bardella, is starting to feel its Saturn return, and next year Jourdain Bardella has a Saturn return, and also France has a Saturn return. So those two people are strongly linked, or rather, Bardella and his country are strongly linked, and it is a Saturnine relationship. And Saturn goes stationary retrograde, exactly 135 degrees from France's Venus. So it is a difficult time for France. It's a difficult time for France's relations with the world, and it's perhaps a difficult time for France's overall confidence. Now Venus is, square the ascendant. It's really at the top of the chart. So in terms of self-esteem, maybe Venus can also be about money. It can be about fashion. Perhaps that's what it is to be French. What it is to be French is somehow under pressure with this Saturn going stationary retrograde. Now, what about the UK? The chart I like to take for the UK is that of England, 1066, the coronation of William I, December the 25th, 1066, at noon. And I know that there were English kings, Anglo-Saxon kings, before William I, but William I was, in a way, he was a beginning of a line of monarchs that really has just flown through, that has continued through until the current monarch, Charles III. We've got our various dynasties, and Britain hasn't really been invaded since 1066. And so here is England's chart, which by extension has become the chart of the United Kingdom. And what I'm interested in is the moon. The moon and also the South Node. There's a lot of Pisces in this chart, and Pluto. So you've got Pluto, moon, and you've got the South Node. And the South Node is about what Britain should be moving away from. And the North Node is where Britain should be moving to. Virgo is the way forward for the UK. It's supposed to be very organised and disciplined, and you think of the stiff upper lip, not getting over emotional. That's the way it should be. That's when Britain works best. And I'm not just being sentimental, some expat being sentimental about the old country. No, I think that's what Britain is about. The Pisces is not what Britain is about. There's a temptation there, perhaps, to get sentimental, to have the chaos of the Civil War and the Wars of the Roses, and just getting perhaps too worked up about maybe human rights. And I suppose you could say, I don't want to express an opinion here, but you could say that an obsession about wokeism is perhaps rather Piscean. And that's a criticism a lot of people make from the right about Britain at the moment, that everything has to be politically correct, and it's all chaotic and too much compassion. South Node in Pisces. And South Node at Pisces, 19 degrees 25 Pisces. Saturn goes stationary direct at 19 degrees 26 Pisces. And that is the moment when we have an election, when we are almost certainly going to have a change of government, when we get a Labour government, and traditionally one thinks about Labour governments as being more compassionate, more into human rights, perhaps more politically correct. And so with Saturn conjunct the South Node, it seems to me that with this election result, Britain is going in the wrong direction. I'm not making a political comment here. I must emphasize that. I haven't voted for a long time. When I was in the UK, I never ever voted for a right-wing party. I just must make that clear. So I'm not expressing my own political prejudices here. I'm just looking at the chart and saying, where should Britain be going? And Pisces is not where Britain should be going. When people get too concerned about rights and get overly compassionate, that's not how Britain works. That's not how Britain should work. And I think that Britain, after the election, it's going to be a problem, as I think we will soon see. So that's my view of Saturn going stationary retrograde on the South Node. Britain, it's going to pull Britain backwards, and it may take Britain a long time to get back into its North Node in Virgo. if it ever happens. So those are a few thoughts on Saturn going stationary retrograde. A couple of countries, a few people, and now I want to turn my attention to the I Ching. So remember, if you don't want your I Ching to be read, you don't have to have it read. You can just, you can stop watching the video now. I'm only doing the I Ching for those who watch the I Ching segment. Hence the question I ask. What is the week starting on Monday, June the 24th, 2024, going to be like for those watching the I Ching segment of this video? And I'm going to answer this question in 4 ways. I'm going to look at it from a general perspective, from a perspective of money, from a perspective of career and business, and finally from a perspective of relationships. So the first hexagram I got was hexagram 11, which is peace. It seems good. It seems that things really are moving. All of the resistance and the opposition and the problems, it's all over, and we do get a sense of flow. At least that seems to be the first impression. But the problem might be that we become complacent and we ignore the fact that trouble is building. Yeah, trouble could be building up. It's perhaps a mythical piece, and we refuse to notice that a couple of things are going wrong, and what we should be doing ideally is to really look ahead. That's the first thing we should be doing this week, looking ahead, asking ourselves, what can go wrong? I think if we really look hard, we will perhaps notice something on the horizon coming up, and that's suggesting that any idea about long-lasting tranquility that's a pipe dream. And so we need to start preparing. And in the first instance, our efforts to prepare will be rewarded, and we will get a certain amount of recognition. And again, we might feel that everything is fine. And then the top line moves, and the top line is about collapse. So something that seemed to be really working, in the end, doesn't work at all. Even if we start to prepare ourselves, it still breaks down. And I think we just have to accept that. I don't really think there's much we can do about it. But I don't want to exaggerate the problem. And we must remember this is only the first hexagram. It does move. And so it may just be that something we're working on, something perhaps we're working on with other people, that, we start to realize there's a problem. We try to fix it. We get a bit of recognition, but still, in the end, it just doesn't work out, and we just have to accept that. And then this hexagram does move to hexagram 37. And this is the family. And it's not a bad hexagram. It's not a particularly exciting hexagram. But when things start to collapse, or when things start to go wrong, as I think they might this week, there are certain people we can rely on. And the people we can rely on are the people we know the best. Now, that might be our family. Another way of looking at this hexagram is to see it as the clan. Who is our group? Who are the people we feel really close to? because those people we can trust, and those people will give us some kind of comfort, and it's not going to be a complete breakdown, I don't think, because certain key relationships are still going to be there, and certain key support systems are going to be there. So if we do start to experience a sense of collapse, don't worry, because it's not the end of the world. Support is there, and we just have to also realize that this is my reading for the week, and so maybe midweek, we realize something is hopeless, but then by the end of a week, we find a way of sort of resolving it, and I think that could be with the help of people who we know and trust. Turning to money, I think we certainly have to be careful, because we might start the week being quite relaxed about money, maybe even being a little bit complacent about money. And if we're honest with ourselves, we can maybe see an expense coming up over the horizon, something which is going to be a drain on our financial resources. Now, some of us might just ignore it, just hope that it will go away, but I don't think it will go away. And when it happens, we try to resolve the issue. There are disagreements about money. That's going to be something that's really difficult to find, is agreement. And then we think we've sorted it out. We try our best to make sure the money is there, making sure that we're not spending too much money, and then things could suddenly get worse. We suddenly realize that the financial situation is not good at all. Now, just remember, this is I Ching. This is for entertainment purposes only. It is only for a week. It all depends on your situation, but there may just be a sense that something financially is just not working at all, and we may even have to accept some kind of loss. But I don't think it's a completely irredeemable loss, simply because of the following hexagram. And the hexagram that it moves to is the family. And so if there is a financial loss, or something goes wrong financially, I think we can, to an extent, rely on other people. We can get help and advice from other people, and most importantly, we're not alone, because we are part of a wider group, and so maybe the wider group can help sustain and spread the loss, if there is any loss. But I suppose when you look at it in a sort of a family sense, once you're part of a group, then it's not so bad. That might indicate that if there is a financial loss, it may be insured. That might be one way of looking at it. So do consider insurance claims if something does happen financially, or perhaps it's already happened and you maybe haven't pursued an insurance claim, and maybe you should, because in a way the family, from a financial sense, is being part of a group where everyone chips in a little bit to cover each other, and so that might be how it can resolve itself. Turning to career and business, as you can imagine, we are really going to have to be on our guard this week. It's so easy to be complacent, to think that everything is fine at work, assuming we are working. It depends what we're doing. Of course, it may be that we're retired, or perhaps we have our own business. Whatever it is, it seems as if everything is okay. It seems that everything's in the right place, in the right order. But if we look hard enough, we can see that there is trouble out there. Maybe it's a wider economy. It may be some broader issue that just makes itself felt, that is starting to make itself felt. We thought it would go away. It doesn't go away. We try to grapple with it. We think it's all working, and then at a certain point, the top line of hexagram 11 breaks, or rather it transitions from broken to unbroken. And with that transition, something just falls in on itself. Maybe it was just something we were working on that we were taking seriously, and we thought it was all going to plan, and something goes wrong, we try to fix it, and then something else goes wrong, and then we actually realize that it's just not working at all. And we perhaps have to give up on it, or perhaps come back to it at a later stage. But I don't think we should be too concerned, because the hexagram it moves to is the family, is the group, being part of the group. And if something goes wrong at work, it's just very important not to take the whole thing to heart. Certainly not to feel that you are solely responsible for it, or indeed to think that someone else is solely responsible for it. It happens in a group. Several people are responsible for it. It's a collective responsibility. So I think it's very important not to blame anyone. Certainly not to accept any blame yourself, and at the same time not to blame other people when things just haven't gone to plan. But really, you can't expect everything to go to plan, and just things haven't gone to plan. And what else do you expect? Saturn is stationary retrograde. Saturn stationary retrograde is a problem, and this is what we're seeing. And so perhaps it's just about accepting the situation and just trying again next week. That could be it. But I do think that by the end of the week, things will have to an extent resolved, but probably not completely. And finally, there is relationships. And relationships, I think, with this I Ching reading, need to be treated with great respect. Now, obviously, this is especially the case if it's a new relationship, because obviously if it's a long-lasting relationship, because it's long-lasting, has by definition been through several storms and weather systems and has survived. So another storm is unlikely to cause too much damage. But if it's a new relationship, then it's going to be quite vulnerable. And so you absolutely cannot be complacent, but really you can't, you mustn't be complacent, whatever the nature of a relationship. And you must start preparing. You must really look at the other person and try to understand the other person. You might think you know them, but you don't know them completely, and they might respond in a way that you weren't expecting. And it might soon become apparent that you and another person actually have a disagreement, and there could be an argument. Now, if you were clever, you would maybe have seen this argument coming. There would have been plenty of warning. But the question is, were you aware of it? Okay, it might not be an argument. It might be just a disagreement, or just an awareness that you and another person simply don't see eye to eye. You're on a different wavelength. At least for this week. I mean, next week is a different matter. I didn't ask about next week. I asked about this week. And yeah, sure, there could be attempts to patch things up, to compromise. But still, the problems keep coming. They keep coming back. And there just may be a moment where it just seems that you and someone else have absolutely nothing in common. And it may feel that a relationship you're in is maybe even finished. Now, if it's a new relationship, maybe it really is finished. If it's a longer lasting relationship, a relationship that's been going on for decades, that is unlikely, especially in light of the hexagram it moves to. So the hexagram it moves to is the family, and that's a sure sign. But if you're in a sort of a family kind of relationship, the family structure is going to be far stronger than any short-term disagreement you might have. The family is strong. The family can solve lots of different problems. And if you and someone else have had a disagreement, I suppose you could say, well, blood is thicker than water. It will resolve itself. And I think that the strength of the family will help. And from your point of view, when you've got the family as a hexagram, it's saying put your ego to one side. And if you do that, and perhaps understand that your role is to maintain stability for this week. I'm not saying that is your role forever, but this week, that's your role, is to maintain stability, keep things on an even keel, and then relationships which might have been under threat at the beginning of a week, things will stabilize. But really, that applies to long-lasting relationships. I think if it's short-term relationships, people you've just met, it may actually be very difficult to get past that first hexagram. I know it says peace, but the trouble is that it says peace because that's what you want, what you hope for, what it appeared to be. But you have to look at the lines. And that top line is really, really bad. I mean, it's not good. It's about something just falling in on itself. And so that might relate to, if it's in terms of a short-term relationship, someone you've just met, things fall in on themselves, but it's going to be very unlikely that you'll be able to move to the next hexagram, which is number 37. On the other hand, if you're talking about someone you've known for a long time, then you move to 37, and the family structure and the hierarchy of a family is just a good way to resolve these kind of problems. And I think in the end, in fact, you can find some kind of peace. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the I Ching. Really sorry to be so negative on that score. But you do have to remember that this is just a reading for 1 week. I do readings every week, and so it's a short-term reading. Anyway, I hope you found that video of some interest. If you did find it interesting, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you find it interesting and you're not subscribed, I'm really grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again very soon.